Mother's Day is coming up, and so this week I'm doing a tribute to those mothers that made an impact in helping me live my best life. Well, Dad stayed on the dairy farm in Saskatchewan, and Mom worked 5 days a week at the Foothills Hospital and wanted to be with him as much as she could. Mom would drive the 300 miles and spend the weekends with Dad, and Mrs. Gill drove me to the ski races on the weekends. Mrs. Gill had 2 sons in university, Don and Dave, the first becoming an engineer and David becoming a doctor. They sat in the back seat with flashlight glasses on, reading and studying. I sat in the front seat, journaling and answering Mrs. Gill's questions. She would say, "They're in school and you are in the Jim Hunter Alpine Ski Racing School of Excellence." Mrs. Gill was very, let's say, intentional about what she did. She was small but powerful. I kept detailed notes, so every question had to be answered. I'm Jungle Jim Hunter, and you're listening to 831 Living Your Best Life, where we inspire participation, communicate precision, and empower performers to podium. And we hope you'll tell your friends and relatives to go to their favorite podcast provider or to junglejimhunter.com or YouTube and subscribe, download, click on like, and rate and review us and become an 831er, someone that will help others live their best life. Before I could get in Mrs. Gill's car, Dad sat down with me and calculated every drive to and from the mountains. Mileage, license, registration, insurance, fuel, wear and tear. I had to pay from my farm wages based on the mileage before I could get in the car. She didn't want to take it, but I couldn't get in the car if she didn't. He had me do the same with the coaches until he found out that the Olympic rules forbid that. So I did get free coaching, but Mrs. Gill had to be paid. Mrs. Gill took the money, but on the way home, we seemed to always have a lot of food in the car, and I think I ate most of what I gave her. Her son sat in the back and listened and enjoyed the food as well, and then looked things up, doing research at the university for me when I had questions. I learned history and the math and science of skiing, and Mrs. Gill gave me a goal that became the main reason for my obsessive-compulsive drive to be the best I could be. I knew about Ernie McCullough, but it was the boys that told me no Canadian male had been on the podium in the Olympics and World Championships. There was no World Cup in 1965, so that's what you raced for. I was going to be the first Canadian male to do so. I would journal my training and my racing and keep track of the notes that the coach told me, and then when I would get in the car, we would sit and talk. She would ask questions, and then she would project it ahead and say, "What do you need to do to work on to be ready to make it to the national level, the international level, the World Championships, and maybe the Olympics?" From time to time, Dave and Don would add their thoughts, pushing me to think better ways and better plays to make. Each time she encouraged me from where I had come to where I was, so I would be inspired for the next day. Each week, I would take what we talked about and worked on it under the streetlights of Northmount Boulevard at 4:30 in the morning, my private little ski hill that I had Monday to Friday. Mrs. did more coaching in the front seat of her car than I had on the ski hill. She helped me stay in the Little Yellow House in Banff, a bed and breakfast place with great meals. I would run down the highway after a day of skiing and she would pick me up. Dave taught me how to wax and tune my skis, and best of all, how to keep short notes rather than writing fluffy stuff. What a great way to grow as a young boy. Mrs. Gill thought of me and talked about everything that I had to do, and she would grill me on what I learned and help me think about how I would use it to improve, but also developing habits that would be used at the next level. Having her 2 university-level sons coaching me and coaxing me extended the habit my parents taught me of recording, reviewing, and redirecting what I was learning on the hill. It made me think bigger growth, not limited growth. It was Mrs. Gill who would drive, take care of her sons, take care of me, gatekeep a race or volunteer in every race, and then have the energy and interest to help me grow. Mrs. Gill was so kind and had become a second mom and dad for me. She looked out for me when my parents could not afford to be there. My first race, I finished 169th, and almost every week you had 2 races, so I had to find a way to improve. Mrs. Gill helped me find ways to find hundredths of a second. The first 3 years of racing were watched and monitored and carefully crafted by Mrs. Gill. This gave my mom and dad time on the weekends to be together. What a gift she gave. It hit me one day sitting there in the front seat. We figured it out that if I made it to the Olympic Games as I hoped that I would, that it would take about 1 million volunteer hours of support to get there. Coaches, course prep, course setters, fencing, side-slipping, gatekeeping, timing, recording, trophies, teardown, result producing. Wow, A ton of people, a ton of work. People. Mrs. Gill taught me to say thank you to everyone. At first, it seemed awkward because people didn't expect it. But over time, I was blessed more than those that I thanked. It made me feel great, and those smiles made me feel that all the work was worth it. Don, the oldest son, rarely wore his gloves, and he taught me how to be comfortable in the cold, and it always worked. David took me on hikes and training runs, climbing mountain trails, and I learned to enjoy the great outdoors and train with using different methods, climbing up and down the mountain. I've been blessed to be at multiple Halls of Fame. The people that made it possible don't get into the Halls of Fame because we focus on the accomplishment of those that achieve the highest levels. However, I think every person should have their own Hall of Acclaim, not Hall of Fame, a Hall of Acclaim, a place where you keep track of those that invested in you, like my 831 list that have a direct hand in your growth and development. But that list should also include the people that only did one thing for you one day that allowed you to live your best life. Mrs. Gill, you raised two young men, one becoming an engineer, the other a doctor. But for 3 years, you were my mom and dad while I learned how to be a ski racer. I couldn't have done it without your help. Thank you, Mrs. Gill, for helping me be better than I was and for giving me a chance to live my best life. You should be in the Hall of Fame with me, but you're in my Hall of Acclaim. Thank you. Thanks for listening. I hope you will have grown and will be living your best life the next time we meet. My quote for the day: the step you take onto the podium is the only one you take alone.